Well, good morning, First Congregational Church. Good morning, Langsburg community. Welcome to my indoors because it is like really cold and windy and snowy outside. The polar vortex has descended, so I have retreated to a corner of my house to greet all of you and say hello from the warmth and comfort of my own home. I hope all of you watching online are in the warmth and comfort of your own home as well. We only have one more week of Epiphany, one more week of this series after this one, and then Lent begins, which will take us in through Easter and springtime. Oh my goodness, springtime is only 42 days away, but who's counting, right? Me, this guy right here, is counting the days until the spring equinox because I love springtime and flowers. I tolerate snow. It's all right sometimes, right? So we welcome you to worship with us today and join in with us with our prayers and songs and readings, and we're going to explore a passage from Mark 1 today that is a little bit vague in its reading. Jesus just goes around healing a bunch of people. What are we going to pull out of this passage? You stay tuned and you shall find out, and I hope this means something good for you today. So we'll see you in a little bit. Peace.
Hi, this is Peyton and Daniel from Ann Arbor, and we are doing the candle lighting today. We light the Christ candle to remind us of the united nature of Christ, who perfectly lived everything it means to be human and everything it means to be God, making the two inseparable forever.
Release us, merciful God, from our false impressions of your divine authority. You do not press down with force. You do not belittle. You do not shame. You do not turn away in coldness or disconnect from our deepest needs. Lift us, O God, whatever heaviness we carry in our hearts and in our bodies, from authorities past or present, whom have not reflected your loving kindness, your transforming power, your perfect intuition, your listening ear, your steady truth. May your divine authority calm the storm inside us before we are overtaken by the illusion that our own power might save us. Let us look upon Jesus as we choose trust over distress, as we yield our compulsions to control our lives, to control others, and absurdly we confess even to control you. May your divine authority free us from our bitter thoughts, our destructive ways, and open us to see anew your true expression of power. In the name of God, the Almighty, Jesus, our benevolent authority, and the Holy Spirit, our guide to divine restoration. Amen. This prayer was written by Crystal Franz.
Great is your faithfulness, O God. You wrestle with the sinner's restless heart. Remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough, your grace is enough, your grace is enough for me.
All right, so this year, I think we got the Summer Olympics coming up, and everyone's wondering like what's gonna happen with the Olympics with coronavirus. Is it still happening? Not happening? I don't really know if it's happening, but I remember watching the Olympics the last time it came around, and I really just like watching the competition between the athletes, and everyone's competing for the gold medal, right? There's gold medal, then there's silver medal, then there's bronze medal, and then there's everybody else, right? And if you walk away with a gold medal from the Olympics, that says something about you. It says that you're like the best in the world at this particular thing. How many times have you heard somebody introduced as a gold medalist from the Olympics in whatever category? See, gold medals, they mean something in our economy of who's great and who's not great. I'm not going to be winning any gold medals in swimming lately. I'm not that fast of a swimmer, even though I've got the streamlined head going on here. It ain't going to happen because in our economy, there's only one person who walks away with a gold medal. There's only one person who is able to climb themselves to the top, right? One team a year makes it to the Super Bowl and win. One team a year makes it to the World Series and wins, right? One person every 4 years gets to be president of the United States of America, right? And back in the day of Mark 1, there was one person who got to be Caesar and be Lord of the whole pretty much known world at the time. And this is how our human economies work. There's one person at the top, and then everyone else kind of falls in place underneath this one person. That's how authority structures work in the human realm. So when we take that authority structure system and then we superimpose that upon God, then all of a sudden we get something a little bit shaky. Now, one of the terms in Mark's gospel, one of the themes in Mark's gospel is the authority of Jesus. And if we take this authority of Jesus and then we just superimpose it over top of our understanding of authority, that is, there's only one greatest, one room at the top of whatever. If we superimpose it on top of that, then we get a misunderstanding of what Jesus has come in authority to do and say. Because our authority systems are based on finite structures. Finite means very limited in resources, right? There's only room for one gold medalist. That's finite. But God is not a finite being. God is infinite. There is no end to God's resources. There is no end to God's loving kindness and his character. There's no end to that. So God's authority is not based upon finite systems that humans operate within. God's authority is based within the infinite, and God can share authority, God can share healing, God can share dignity, and not diminish at all. There's only one room for a gold medalist, and the best saint in the whole history of everyone ever is going to make it to the top, and then everyone else is kind of like getting, the gold star on your paper. That's not how it works. So our systems are built on these finite structures where God's systems are built on infinite. Our systems are based on competition, limited resources, and only room for very few at the top of our authority structures. And God's authority is based on something more infinite and more grand. So now we can be lighthearted about our structures that we have. You know, it's fun to see, you know, competitions between athletes. It's fun to see who makes it to the top. It can be lighthearted and fun, motivating. It can be inspiring to see somebody win. It can be helpful to people. So this isn't necessarily taking human authority structures and saying, no good, and God's authority and saying, you're good. This is just a way of bringing a little bit of perspective to what we're about to read in Mark 1. But when these finite structures that we hold, authority structures we have, when they're held with severity, then it becomes exclusive, it becomes shaming, abusive, suppressing, and harmful to people. When we start stepping on other people or cheating or trying to nudge our way to the top at the expense of another person or at the expense of another group or whatever, then all of a sudden these authority structures start to implode upon themselves and they become bad. And worse yet is when we shove an infinite God into the finite games that we play, then our religion becomes an abusive, shaming, suppressing, harmful exercise of our own selfishness, cloaked in self-righteousness. So this is really important, why we got to get this authority piece right as we start to read Mark chapter 1. So the story we're going to read today untangles God from the finite games of authority that we play and that we shoved God into, so that we can encounter the generosity of God, the great love of God, the great kindness and mercy of God, the great justice of God that brings dignity to all humans. And this is the authority of God. God has the right to do this here among us. And we're going to watch Jesus walk around displaying this authority. And we get to watch how this unfolds. So we're going to have Eugene read this passage for us, and then we'll dive in on the other side and explore a little bit.
Mark 1, 29 through 39. Jesus heals many. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the house of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, and he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Jesus prays in a solitary place. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons.
This first section we're going to look at, I've called it, I've got a fever. And that's, if you know what that comes from, kudos to you. But here, words matter. So before we really dive into what is going on in this passage, which we're not going to be able to really dig it all apart, we gotta know that words matter to the book of Mark. Specifically, these words matter, and he uses a couple of words that really show us and illustrate what he's trying to communicate to us about Jesus. So the word that opens up this passage is the word immediately. Now, we could, dive into this word and you all get bored real fast. But the word immediately here, we got to remember that Mark uses this word quite a bit because he's trying to show us something. So just to show you how much that Mark is trying to show us the action and movement and of Jesus. Let's see, the word immediately in this Greek word is used 3 times in the book of Luke, the entire book of Luke, which has 25,640 words. I didn't count them all. I found Google and they helped me, right? So 3 times in 25,000 words. It's not a lot. The word immediately is not used that much in Luke. Then we have the book of John, used again 3 times. The word immediately is used 3 times in the book of John out of 18,658 words that are in the book of John. So again, that's not a lot of immediatelys happening in the book of John. Matthew cranks it up a little bit. There's 8 times the word immediately is used in the book of Matthew, which has 23,343 words. So a lot of words, not a lot of usages of the word immediately. Now the Gospel of Mark only has roughly 15,000 words. It's the shortest gospel out of the 4. So 14,949 words, and he uses the word immediately 44 times. That's a lot of times in such a short little capacity. So he uses this term 30 times more than the other gospel writers. So he's really trying to hone in on this theme of immediately. And these words matter because the action of Jesus is tied to the authority of Jesus. Okay, words matter some more, right? What's happening here is he uses another word for when he heals Peter's mother-in-law of the fever. He raises her up. He, grabs her hand, raises her up. Now that Greek word raised up is quite a fun and exciting word for me and other theologians because we're nerdy. Just to give you a little bit of context for this word, it's used 20 times in the book of Mark. That's just a lot of times to be using raised up. And every time Jesus is doing a miracle that's happening, they're raising them up. So there's something we got to pay attention to here, because here in Mark chapter 1, he raises up Peter's mother-in-law from the fever. So there's raised up. And then we have in chapter 2, the paralytic is raised up and becomes healed. And then in chapter 3, we have the leper. Right, you just got to touch a leper and the leper's good, but not just that, he's raised up. He uses the word raised up for healing the leper. There is a deceased child in chapter 5 that Jesus holds her hand and she gets up. She doesn't just get up, she raises up. We have an epileptic in chapter 9 that is healed and he raises them up. The blind man in chapter 10 grabbed him by the hand, raises him up. So every time Jesus is doing a miracle, Mark makes specific note to tie the word raised up to it. And then the final time it's used is when Jesus is dead and buried because the crucifixion has taken place and Jesus raises up and the resurrection occurs. So this term raising up is another word that's very important to the book of Mark, because this is what Jesus is doing. This is the authority and action and movement of Jesus, as he's constantly on the move and he's constantly raising people up. So Christ's miracles, while he raises them up and they physically get up, it's also meant to be like this pictorial representation that he's raising them up and restoring them to the dignity of their humanity. In Christ, human flourishing is bigger than personal success, because Christ knows when one part suffers, all suffer. It affects everything. It affects everyone. If one part of creation is suffering, there is a ripple effect that finally gets to each and every one of us. And in our hyper-individualistic age, where everything is just about me, myself, and I, and how it affects me, we don't have an understanding of how physical creation affects how we live. It's the air we breathe, literally, the water we drink that turns into our blood. It's everything, the food that we eat that gets turned into the very cellular being of our makeup. We are in a symbiotic relationship with creation. And if creation is suffering, we are suffering. So we need to take care of this planet, but also we are also a part of the family of humanity. And when one group, even if it's on the other side of the globe, if they're suffering, it affects us, because human suffering is something that Christ is banishing and getting rid of in this book of Mark. So there's no, in the book of Mark, there's no finite game where a few win at this game called human flourishing, and then the rest of the people don't get to do that. Jesus' actions here showed Christ healing many. He heals someone specific, Peter's mother-in-law, but then he goes around and he's just healing and healing many, many, many people. So many and specific happening here. And you notice here that when Peter's mother-in-law is healed, she's free to serve. See, when we're held down, when we're oppressed, when we're suffering, it's hard for us to contribute to human flourishing in the ways that we're gifted to do so. But when Peter's mother-in-law is healed, she gets up and she makes everybody a meal. That sounds like a really great deal to me. So when other people are in their flourishing, then it frees them up to help the human flourishing of all creation everywhere for all time. So when one part suffers, all parts suffer. When one human suffers, all humans suffer. And you might not feel it. It might not be in your comprehension of your brain or right in your radar for the day when you gotta, get to work and feed the kids and do all the stuff. But it does have a ripple effect all throughout, everywhere. When one suffers, all suffer. So it's very important here in the book of Mark that Jesus is walking around healing and healing and healing. So what happens next? We're going to check it out.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, help me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. When my life is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When the darkness appears and the night draws near, and the day is past and gone, at the river I stand, guide my feet, hold my hand. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home.
So Jesus just walks around healing lots of people. That's his job. He's doing something. Jesus here is dispelling the forces of darkness, right? There's sickness, there's disease, there's feeble, there's evil spirits. That Jesus is walking around and dispelling all of the forces of darkness. How do we know this? Because it says, that after he heals Peter's mother-in-law, he heads out to a solitary place to pray. And then it uses the phrase, while it was still dark. Everyone's looking for Jesus. Where is Jesus? So while it's still dark, Jesus is dispelling the forces of darkness, sickness, disease, fever, evil spirits, all these things that Mark touches on. Jesus is doing that while it's still dark. It's physically representing the time of day, but it's also meant to communicate this symbolic nature that he didn't come to get rid of everything for all time yet. He's come for a specific task, and he's going to do that, but not everyone gets healed, right? Because everyone's like, oh wow, Jesus is healing people. Let's hightail it all over to Jesus. And he can't go anywhere without running into a crowd. But here it says that he leaves. He's like, hey, the disciples are like, hey, everybody's looking for you. We got more people to heal. He's like, I'm going to go to the next town. You want to come? And so these people are left like, where'd he go? What happened? So it wasn't his thing to walk around and heal every single human person ever. But this is captured in this phrase, while it's still dark. Everyone's looking for Jesus. And Jesus is found in this quiet and deserted place, and he says, let's go on. Let's move on to the next town. So he specifically leaves unfinished business. Now, this is a part of the narrative of Mark. Jesus leaving unfinished business is a part of the narrative of Mark. If you're thinking, that's not fair. You know, if I stood in line all this time to get in front of Jesus and then he just leaves before I can get there, that's not fair. And you might be right on that and not being fair, but that's not what Mark is trying to communicate, that Jesus has come to just heal every single person and he's going to keep going until every single human on the whole planet is healed. That was not Jesus's agenda in the book of Mark. So in the book of Mark, Jesus said that he came to proclaim. He came to proclaim. That's weird because Jesus didn't say anything. He just walks around doing stuff, but he doesn't say, there's no big Sermon on the Mount moment. There's not some great dialogues and didactic teachings and all these other, there ain't none of that in Mark. He just walks around healing people. But he says, I came to proclaim. I didn't come to do all this work and heal every single human person that comes my way here. And again, our human mind says, well, that's not fair because, you know, why not? In the book of Mark, the narrative that Mark is trying to communicate, Jesus leaves unfinished business because he's calling the disciples. And the disciples are going to go out and carry what Jesus wants to do forward. And it's going to be their job. So this is written to disciples who have been given a task of spreading the news that Christ is Lord of all creation and has been raised from the dead, defeating sin and death and evil. That's their job. That's unfinished business. So this narrative is about Jesus encouraging them to go out and do what they've been called to do. When we get there, this word proclaim is important because it's used 14 times in the book of Mark. That's a lot of times in the book of Mark. And it's used 6 times specifically in chapter 1. So chapter 1 is this big proclamation. And the proclamation is not based on, you know, teaching principles and theological bullet points and all this. The book of Mark is trying to get us that the proclamation is shown in these actions of Jesus, dispelling the forces of darkness. And he said to proclaim. So it's 14 times in the book of Mark. And you would think that that's Jesus' job, to proclaim. Other gospels, right? Matthew only uses it 9 times, and it's a much longer book. Luke uses it 9 times. John doesn't use it at all, this term proclaim. Now you would think that the book of Acts, where everyone's going out and proclaiming, the big message is a long book, that it'd have quite a few times that proclaim is used, but it doesn't. It only has proclaim 8 times. And so here, 14 times in the book of Mark, and you know, almost half of those times are used in chapter 1, where this is another theme that we're supposed to latch onto, that there is a proclamation coming out here that Jesus is dispelling the forces of darkness that keep humanity suppressed and oppressed and hunkered down. So John the Baptist comes proclaim, and Jesus comes and proclaims. That's kind of like a wow moment. We're going up here. The next person that proclaims, who's going to be the grand proclaimer at the end of this chapter? And it is a healed leper. Someone who was cast aside, someone who was thrown to the edges of society. You weren't allowed to be around them. You weren't allowed to touch them. You weren't allowed to basically look at them. They were just one of the cast aside people. And we have this kind of momentum building of proclamation in all of chapter 1, where John the Baptist, and then Jesus, and then a leper. Well, that's unexpected. We didn't expect this leper to come out and start proclaiming that Jesus has come to dispel the forces of evil and darkness among us. So this shows us that this raising up that Jesus raises people up in dignity and in humanity, restoring and healing that which keeps us from obtaining our own dignity and humanity. He's restoring the image of God within the image of humanity. That's what Christ is doing. And this leper gets the same calling, the same task as John the Baptist, and the same calling and the same task as Jesus, before the disciples are even called to go and proclaim the message. But this leper gets to go and take the message like an apostle, like a evangelist, like a pastor, like somebody really important. But he was on the fringes and edges of society, kicked there by the people who had more authority and importance than anybody else. And Jesus here shares the authority of the proclamation. Now he tells them, don't say anything. That is a fun little moment that we can't really wrap up until chapter 15, the reason why he told them not to say anything. We'll get there one day, I promise. We can't go there today. But for now, there is unfinished business that Jesus leaves behind. He left behind people who were seeking him for healing, seeking him for restoration, and he says, I got to go to these other towns and proclaim it there. So he left and went there instead. So he leaves unfinished business. But again, if we're following the narrative of the story of Mark, it's to give a message to the disciples left behind after Jesus resurrects and goes back to God the Creator. And the followers of Jesus who are left here post-resurrection are reading this account of the resurrection of Christ, and they're saying, oh, there's unfinished business, and we're called to do something about that. And as a follower of Jesus today, you and I are called to do something about the unfinished business that Mark is talking about. There are people that have not experienced the healing and dignity and humanity that they were created to experience. And it is our job to extend that as proclaimers of the message of Jesus, that we get to go and do that. We get to proclaim in actions, and in our words, that Jesus is dispelling the forces of darkness currently, still here among us. And I like what St. Francis of Assisi said. He said, preach the gospel, proclaim the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words.
You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 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 That is who you are.
Hello everybody, would you join me in a prayer by Crystal Franz? Let us open ourselves to a new way of thinking about authority. May we support each other in the process of letting go of the hurt we felt under rogue command, of the regrets we've had in our own blunders and insensitivities. Let us welcome God's divine authority, welcoming peace. Together, may we soften under your power, not because we are dominated, but because we are treasured, because we trust that your work is good. As we move through our week, transform our thoughts, comfort our spirits, stir our wills to serve. Let us live your revelation of authority as Jesus lived. We pray this in the name of the boundless Creator, our perfect teacher, in the Spirit which transforms us. Amen.
Well, thanks for joining me up in my corner cove of my house here. Let me stay warm and not be in the outdoors. It's chilly out there, y'all. I hope you're staying warm. I hope you're staying cozy. I hope you're staying safe. And if you want to partner with us in any of our readings or anything, just drop us a line. We'd love to include you in that. And if you want to partner with us financially, if this message was helpful for you, any of the service elements was helpful to you in any way, and you want to bless us back, there is a link right here that you can just type into your little search bar up there, and it'll take you right there. You can set up a recurring or a one-time, and we would love your ongoing support. So we'll see you next week for the very last very last week of Epiphany, and then we're going to start a new series after that called Walk This Way, and it's about Lent, and it'll be fun. We'll see you next week. Peace.